Welcome to The Explainer. Okay, today we are unpacking a truly wild ride from the mind of science fiction master Frederik Pohl. It's a story called The Knights of Arthur, and if you think you know post-apocalyptic survival stories, well, you're going to want to throw all those grim, depressing tropes right out the window. Because what we are looking at today isn't just a survival tale. It is essentially a magnificent, high-stakes con job set against the backdrop of a totally ruined world.
So how exactly do you steal a luxury ocean liner in a post-apocalyptic wasteland? I mean, it sounds completely absurd, right? But that is literally the puzzle our protagonists have to solve. I want you to kind of frame this entire narrative in your mind as an improvisational, classic heist movie. Think Ocean's 11, but, with radioactive dust, electric typewriters, and a whole lot of scavenged supplies. Let's see how they actually pull this off.
Part 1. A post-apocalyptic heist.
Okay, let's dive into this. Obviously, before the war, New York was the bustling metropolis we all know. But today, under the rule of a guy known as the Major, reality is just bizarre. At first, survivors were bartering with cigarettes until they cracked enough bank vaults to just toss around massive bundles of useless cash. And Macy's? Yeah, it isn't a department store anymore. It's this dark, skeletal, heavily guarded PX where survivors literally rummage past old skeletons just to haggle thousands of dollars for a typewriter or a wheelbarrow. And that brings us to a pretty staggering number, 15,000. That is the total population of survivors in all of New York City. The vast millions are just gone, leaving exactly 15,000 people trying to keep the power stations, the Coast Guard, and the local groceries running. Honestly, this gives you a great sense of the incredibly tight, claustrophobic fishbowl society our characters are navigating, and, well, desperately trying to escape.
Part 2. The Dictator of New York.
So, meet our mark. The Major. Before the war, this guy was a total nobody, just a former underground missile duty officer. But because he happened to be perfectly safe in a sealed bunker when the missiles hit, he eventually emerged to find himself as the highest-ranking military officer left alive. So what does he do? He marches right down to the Empire State Building, sets up a military government on the 91st floor, and now he rules the ruined city through absolutely absurd bureaucracy. He literally demands reports in triplicate, complete with 8 endorsements in a dead city. It's this hilarious critique of middle management surviving the apocalypse. 109. That is the staggering number of women the Major has quote-unquote married. He's been averaging about a marriage a month for years, basically hoarding human beings the exact same way he hoards the city's power and resources. He is this deeply jealous, petty dictator, which of course makes him the absolute perfect target for our crew.
Part 3. The Brain and the Crew.
All right, let's meet the crew pulling off this job. Each character brings a totally unique background that perfectly sets them up for this ridiculous heist. First up, we have Sam, who's our narrator and the muscle. He's a hard-boiled Navy yeoman who actually helps the Major set up all his beloved red tape. Then there's Vern, the engineer. He's scheming, highly improvisational, and totally the mastermind behind the whole plan. Next is Amy, our inside woman. She's a lieutenant working under the Major who desperately wants out before she inevitably becomes wife number 110. And finally, there's Arthur, the brain. And guys, I mean that literally. Yeah, Arthur is a brain floating inside a 4-gallon, shiny metal prosthetic tank. He actually survived a lethal accident back before the war while serving on a Navy submarine. So he has no physical body anymore. His wires service his fingers and ears, and he communicates by hooking himself up to electric typewriters or banging these loud warning gongs. But here's the absolutely crucial point. Despite being a literal brain in a can, Arthur desperately wants to sail the open seas. He wants to be a ship captain.
And you got to understand, Arthur is not some calm, calculated, robotic AI. No way. He is a highly emotional, constantly stressed out guy. For example, he frantically types out messages like, "You damn fool, why did you leave me alone?" He literally hammers this out at Sam after being left alone in a hotel room for a bit. Arthur's constant, almost panicked anxiety and his frustration with the rest of the crew is just a brilliant comedic anchor for the whole story.
Part 4. Rigging the Queen Elizabeth.
So the actual score starts with the ultimate con. The crew manages to locate the Queen Elizabeth superliner docked in the harbor, and miraculously, it's still floating. But obviously they don't have anywhere near the manpower or resources to fix it up themselves, so Vern uses his genius to trick the Major. He manages to convince the dictator that the crew is repairing the Queen Elizabeth purely to gift it to him as a luxurious birthday yacht. And it totally works. The Major eagerly supplies them with all the manpower, the guards, and the heavy equipment they need to do the dirty work for them.
But to actually pull this off, Verne has to overcome a massive manpower shortage by fully automating the ship. First, he centralizes the engine control by heavily altering the wiring diagram. Then, he completely reroutes the electronic steering and the servo motors. He essentially wires absolutely everything on that massive vessel straight to a single bridge panel. The whole ship is now fully prepared to be driven by a single entity. I mean, can you guess who?
But hold on, before they can even think about sailing, they need oil, and lots of it. Scouting Bayonne's 50 moored tankers gets both incredibly dangerous and pretty hilarious. Verne, while poking around looking for oil, accidentally ignites a tanker, which ends up blowing the entire 50-ship mooring sky high, literally like a volcano. But despite nearly blowing themselves to pieces, they miraculously find another fully loaded tanker, tow it all the way up the North River, and pump the bunkers full. The Queen Elizabeth's antique screws finally turn over. The ship is alive.
Part 5. The Great Escape. Now we're at the climax, and the getaway timeline is insanely tight. At 1700 hours, the Major and over 80 of his wives board the Queen Elizabeth for a massive drunken birthday party. This is the perfect distraction. While the Major is busy throwing back scotch, at 1800, Sam is sprinting across town to break Arthur out of the Consolidated Edison power plant. He's literally dodging guards by climbing across an industrial coal scoop bucket chain, gangling over a street, and even gets into a boathook fight on the river. It's wild. By 1830, Sam manages to sneak Arthur aboard, and Verne plugs the brain directly into the ship's controls.
Meanwhile, the Major is still busy partying away on deck, but down below, Arthur is hooked up to a typewriter frantically hammering out a massive warning. He types, "Left 4, 13, 14, and 21 boilers with a full head of steam and the safety valves locked." Because he's so stressed out, Arthur is literally seconds away from blowing the ship's boilers sky high if Verne and Sam don't give him the signal to shove off right then and there.
Finally, they give the order. Arthur takes the wheel, and it is just this wonderfully triumphant moment. The massive superliner literally becomes his new body. The keel is his belly, the engines are his beating heart. The Major's guards finally realize what's happening and try to stop them, but Arthur easily traps them just by remotely triggering the ship's fire hoses and snapping the watertight doors shut. With a huge blast of the ship's massive horn, Arthur backs the colossal vessel right out of its berth, churning up tons of mud, and they race straight for the open ocean.
So what's the actual aftermath of this massive con? Well, it's an absurdly happy ending, to be honest. The Major, totally defeated and outmaneuvered, takes one look at the prospect of rowing a tiny dinghy all the way back to his remaining angry wives and just decides to surrender. He happily agrees to stay on board as a cabin boy. Meanwhile, Arthur, fully embracing his role as the ship's actual captain, legally performs a wedding ceremony for Sam and Amy at sea, and he's laughing so hard through his electrical typewriters that he actually jams the keys. The crew basically claims the entire world's oceans for themselves.
So, what does this all mean? Well, Pohl leaves us with this brilliantly satirical commentary on authoritarianism and endless bureaucracy. It really makes you wonder, in a completely ruined world, is the ultimate freedom found by just leaving society behind entirely? Because instead of trying to fix a broken, oppressive system run by an absurd dictator, our crew simply builds their own floating utopia and sails right away from it. It's a great reminder that sometimes the very best way to win a rigged game is to literally just steal the board. I absolutely highly recommend checking out the original text to experience all the wit and tension firsthand. Thanks so much for joining me to unpack this incredible explainer.